Part 1. The incident at Pinebrook Market. Danielle Brooks, a strikingly beautiful black woman, was calmly doing her grocery shopping when two uniformed police officers decided to entertain themselves at her expense. Instead of focusing on their duties, they chose to mock and belittle her, throwing rude remarks and sneering glances her way. Perhaps they believed their badges gave them the right. But Danielle was not one to be intimidated. She stood her ground and demanded the respect she deserved. That's when everything spiraled out of control. Tension escalated quickly, raised voices, angry words, and then, shockingly, a barrage of racial slurs that echoed through the supermarket aisles. Before anyone could fully grasp what was happening, the officers grabbed her and slapped handcuffs on her wrist, right there in the middle of a busy store, surrounded by stunned shoppers. Danielle had done nothing wrong except speak up for herself. Yet she was treated like a criminal, humiliated and arrested without cause. She was paraded out while the two officers, smug and self-satisfied, seemed to believe they had taught her a lesson. But they had made a critical mistake, one that would cost them dearly. What they had made a critical mistake didn't realize was that Danielle wasn't just any woman. Her ties ran deep within the very police department they worked for. And when her true identity would soon be revealed back at the station, everything would change. Desperate pleas, regret, and a reckoning would follow. You won't believe what happens next in this ironic and dramatic unraveling. Part 2. A regular day turned sour bright white. Lead lights poured down from the high ceiling of Pinebrook Market, casting a crisp glow over the neatly stacked shelves and colorful rows of produce. The soft background music barely rose above the sound of shopping carts rolling across the tile floor, beeping scanners at checkout counters, and the buzz of conversation among busy customers. It was a typical weekday afternoon in the heart of the city. Amid the bustle, Danielle Brooks naturally drew attention, not because she sought it, but because of the quiet confidence and radiant intelligence she carried with her. 34. Danielle was a respected biomedical researcher, and though the day had been taxing, she had dressed simply. Relaxed jeans, a soft gray t-shirt, and comfortable sneakers, practical for picking up groceries on her way home. She moved slowly home through the store, pushing her cart while scrolling through a shopping list on her phone. Now and then, she paused to examine fresh vegetables or grab a specific spice for a dinner she had planned. Her mind was somewhere else, wrapped in thoughts of work and home, not even remotely prepared for the confrontation that was approaching. At the far end of the aisle, two uniformed figures entered the scene. They stood out awkwardly among the shoppers. Leading the way was Officer Frank Delaney, a man in his late 40s with a sagging midsection, weary eyes, and the demeanor of someone long bored by routine patrols. Flanking him was Officer Jake Carson, tall, young, and overly eager to assert himself, his smirk often betraying his enjoyment of moments that gave him power over others. Part 3. The harassment escalates. Perhaps they had just wrapped up a routine report on a lost item at Pinebrook Market, or maybe they simply stopped in for a soda and a chance to loiter away from their patrol duties. It wasn't exactly legal, but it wasn't unheard of either. Officer Delaney's eyes roamed the store lazily until they abruptly locked onto Danielle Brooks. He elbowed Officer Carson in the ribs with a knowing grin. "Hey, look at that," Delaney muttered under his breath, his voice slow but laced with something coarse. "Now that's some fine company." The smirk on Carson's face widened. The smirked. Everything dripped with words. Everything dripped with judgment and crude assumptions. In Delaney's mind, racial and gender stereotypes came to life. Without shame, rather than heading for the exit, the two officers casually turned down the dairy aisle where Danielle was examining a wedge of aged cheddar. They slowed their pace, then came to a stop just beside her, pretending to study the shelf, but their eyes never stayed on the labels. They were locked on her. Delaney cleared his throat and tried on a friendly tone, though it came out forced and oily. "Hey there, pretty lady," he said, too casual to be innocent. "Ha, you've got quite a haul. Need a strong, gallant officer to push your cart?" Carson snickered beside him, leaning a bit closer. "Or might be you're searching for something special," he said, drawing out the word with a smirk, layering it with a meaning he didn't bother to hide. Danielle immediately felt the shift in the air, the unwanted attention, the disrespect laced beneath the surface. She replied firmly, her voice polite but distant, as she placed the cheese in her cart and began steering it in the opposite direction. Her calm refusal stung. Delaney, in particular, felt the slap of rejection. He was a man accustomed to being feared, or at the very least obeyed, when wearing the badge. Being brushed off like this, especially by someone he saw as lesser, tugged at his fragile pride. Instead of walking away, they followed. Danielle moved into the canned goods aisle, trying to stay focused, but the two officers lingered just a few feet behind. Not too close, but close enough to make her feel like a target. "Why the cold shoulder, sweetheart?" Delaney said again, this time his voice more taunting than playful. "Just trying to get to know our community," Carson added, stepping a little closer. "Crowded place like this. You gotta be careful. Crowd get pickpocketed. Lucky we're here to protect you." The words hung heavy with mockery, as if her mere presence in this space was somehow suspicious, something to be monitored. They edged up beside her cart, standing so close they nearly blocked her path. The invasion of personal space was deliberate. The sour stench of cigarette clung to Delaney's uniform, and the way Carson's eyes roamed over her made Danielle's stomach churn. She tightened her grip on the cart handle, steadying her breath. She knew what they were trying to do, and she wasn't going to give them the reaction they were hoping for. Part 4. The breaking point. Danielle's patience snapped. Gone. Replaced by sharp clarity and authority. Her words rang out clearly, enough for the nearby shoppers to hear. She said firmly, "You're disturbing me. You're police officers on duty, I assume. And this kind of behavior is not only inappropriate, it's unprofessional. Teasing and harassing a citizen like this, that's abuse of power." She looked Officer Delaney straight in the eyes, then turned her unwavering gaze to Carson. Her tone was fearless. "I'm telling you right now, stop this. Leave me alone. If you continue, I'll have no choice but to record your badge numbers and file a formal complaint with your department." That moment, Danielle's clear, public stand triggered an eruption from the officers. Delaney's face twisted in fury, his fake smile disintegrating into a snarl. You, little brat," he barked, his voice cracking with rage. "Who do you think you're talking to? Threatening a cop?" Carson stepped forward aggressively, his hand flinching upward as if to point at her face. His expression was gleeful in a sick way, riding the wave of adrenaline. "Oh, I get it," he sneered. "You think you're something special, 'cause you're pretty? Say, you better shut your mouth before I drag you down to the station myself." Their voices grew louder, filled with hostility, profanity, racial slurs, crude, sexist insults. The air became thick with aggression as they unleashed their fury in public. "You're probably just looking for attention, acting all high and mighty," Delaney spat. "Go back to wherever the hell you came from." Their shouting had drawn a crowd. Shoppers nearby began to pause, drawn by the spectacle. Some by the spectacle looked shocked. Others pulled out phones. Danielle was shaken, but still standing tall. Her heart pounded, her face flushed with disbelief and fury, but she didn't back down. "You have no right to speak to me, or anyone, like that," she said, her voice trembling but unwavering. "This is an insult. This is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable." Delaney leaned in, face twisted with rage. "Oh, you want to see unacceptable?" he snarled. He jerked his chin toward Carson. "Arrest her. Public disturbance. Insulting an officer. Resisting." The charges were a lie. An instant fabrication to justify retaliation. But Carson didn't hesitate. Like a well-trained dog, he lunged. He grabbed Danielle's arm roughly. She instinctively recoiled, trying to yank it away. "Don't touch me," she screamed. "Aha! Resisting!" Carson shouted with mock triumph. Seizing the opportunity, with brute force, he twisted her arm behind her back. Danielle cried out in pain. The scuffle was brutal and fast. Carson shoved her hard against a metal shelving unit. Cans toppled and clattered around them as Danielle struggled, trying to remain upright. Ignoring her protest, Carson forced the cold steel handcuffs onto her wrist. Full view of the public. Part 5. The crowd, the cuffs, and the cruelty. Carson deliberately tightened the cuffs around Danielle's slender wrists, the metal biting into her skin, leaving red welts that throbbed with pain. Officer Delaney stood back, arms folded, watching the scene unfold with sick satisfaction. He muttered curses under his breath, eyes gleaming as if this humiliation were a reward around them. Whispers swell. The surrounding crowd at Pine Brook Market had grown larger. The once casual shoppers, now frozen in disbelief. Some gasped aloud. Others fumbled for their phones, quietly beginning to record the disturbing spectacle. 2 officers handcuffing a woman in the middle of a supermarket aisle. Without clear cause and with unmistakable aggression, Danielle's heart pounded. But she held her head high. The shame of being treated like a criminal burned inside her, hotter than the pain in her wrists. She wasn't just being arrested. She was being arrested. Degraded, paraded, punished for daring to speak up, for standing up against harassment and injustice. She took deep, steady breaths, staring straight ahead. Her memory captured every detail of the officers' faces, the smug looks, the arrogance, the abuse of power committed so boldly in front of witnesses. In the thick silence, interrupted only by murmurs and the quiet whir of phone cameras, Delaney and Carson began escorting Danielle out of the store. Their grip on her arms was firm, their movements rough, the pride in their stride was unmistakable. They looked as though they'd just performed some noble duty. Outside, they shoved her toward the patrol car with no regard for her comfort. Delaney yanked open the back door, pushed her in with a grunt, and slammed it shut. Inside the cold, cramped back seat, Danielle sat stiffly, the metal cuffs digging into her skin. Despite the physical pain and rising anger, she refused to cry. She stared through the mesh partition, watching the 2 officers settle into the front seats, laughing like bullies after recess. "Told you," Delaney said to Carson, his voice dripping with smugness. "Uppity girls like that need to be reminded who's in charge." Carson laughed. "Yeah, let her stew in the station for a few hours. She'll be soft as pudding. Won't dare talk back again." They drove back toward the precinct, cracking crude jokes about Danielle's attitude, her looks, even the way she had spoken. Their confidence was absolute. In their minds, this was a clean win, just another mouthy citizen taught a lesson. But they had no idea what awaited them. At the station, Danielle was led through the side entrance into the check-in area. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as a few uniformed officers milled about, handling routine paperwork. Behind the counter sat Sergeant Adams, a graying, middle-aged man with weary eyes, and the slump of someone nearing the end of a long shift. Delaney stepped forward, puffed up with false pride. "Sergeant Adams, we've got one from Pine Brook. Public disorder, insulting officers, resisting." He pushed Danielle forward a little, his tone clipped and rehearsed. Slowly, his eyes passed over Danielle, then back to Delaney and Carson. He sighed, a deep, familiar sigh of someone used to nonsense dressed up as protocol. "All right," he muttered. "Bring her in for processing." Danielle was led to the full intake area. She complied without protest, answering questions about her name, age, and address. Her calmness stood out. No tears, no yelling, just cold silence and clear, steady responses. Sergeant Adams took notice, slightly. Something about this didn't feel right. Delaney and Carson, meanwhile, stood off to the side, smirking, exchanging glances, still basking in what they believed was victory. They didn't realize that this moment, so routine for them, was about to turn into the beginning of their undoing. Part 6. The fiancé Delaney stood with his arms folded, eyes sharp, watching with interest. He was waiting for that final, satisfying moment, when this arrogant girl would finally realize what it meant to be treated like a real criminal. After completing the routine intake details, Sergeant Adams glanced up from the screen and asked the standard question one had asked hundreds of times before. "Do you want us to notify anyone about your detention?" A family member, an attorney. It was the moment Danielle had been waiting for. She inhaled deeply, straightened her posture, and looked Sergeant Adams directly in the eye. Then she turned slightly, deliberately, to glance at officers Delaney and Carson, who were still grinning like schoolboys who had gotten away with a prank. Her voice was calm and measured, not loud, but filled with gravity. "Eyes, please," called Sheriff David McMillan. The air in the room shifted. Adams paused, his fingers frozen, mid-keystroke. He looked at Danielle with raised eyebrows, clearly unsure whether she was bluffing or just trying to scare the officers. The name she had spoken wasn't just any name, it was the name. Sheriff McMillan was the highest-ranking officer in the entire county. Her mentioning him at all felt like a bold, risky move. Delaney broke into laughter. "Ah, you hear that, Sarge?" he said, stepping closer to the counter. "She's pulling out the big guns now. Said we should call the sheriff himself." Carson snorted, shaking his head. "My beam next shall say. She's the governor's niece." Their smug amusement was short-lived. Danielle turned back to Adams, her eyes steady, her voice now steely. "I am his fiancée," she said. Then she paused, just long enough to let the weight of the words settle like concrete. "Call David." Words, "I am his fiancée," detonated like a bomb in the check-in room. Delaney and Carson went silent instantly. Their grins vanished as if they'd been slapped. Both men froze in place, their faces contorting from confidence to pure horror. It was as if the floor had opened beneath them. Sergeant Adams stared at Danielle. His file slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a thud. His face turned white. Sheriff David McMillan, engaged. And this was the woman they had just manhandled, humiliated, cuffed, and dragged into the station like a stray dog. The same woman they mocked in the patrol car. The same one they had shoved into a rack of canned beans. Delaney's throat bobbed in a nervous swallow. Carson's jaw hung open. Sweat poured from their brows, soaking into the backs of their uniforms. They understood. They understood everything. They had just buzzed the one woman who could end their careers with a phone call. Not only was she connected, she was connected in the most personal, unbreakable way. There was no escaping this. No paperwork trick, no spin, no excuse. It was over, completely over. The silence in the room was suffocating. Adams bent quickly to retrieve the drop file. Hands trembling, he scrambled for the intercom, suddenly pale and frantic. He didn't dare waste another second. Not after that bombshell. Not after seeing what hung in the balance. Not just for Delaney and Carson, but for everyone who had witnessed this mess unfold. And somewhere deep in the building, the name Danielle Blake had already begun to echo. Part 7. The reckoning chief David McMillan happened to still be in his office, wrapping up the final paperwork of the day when the call came through. It had been a long shift, and he was more than ready to head home until the intercom buzzed with urgency. Moments later, the door to the check-in room swung open with a low creak, and McMillan stepped in, tall, stern, his boots heavy against the tile. His tired face scanned the room instinctively, expecting some minor incident. Then his eyes landed on her. Danielle. She stood near the counter, her hands still cuffed, posture stiff. With exhaustion, her expression calm. But beneath that calm was fire. Rage coiled like a spring. McMillan froze for half a heartbeat, stunned. His eyes fell to the red marks on her wrists, then snapped to Delaney and Carson, who stood nearby paling. As ghosts, visibly trembling, the surprise on his face didn't last long. It twisted quickly into something darker, disbelief, then fury. It flickered first in his clenched jaw, then surged into his piercing blue eyes. His voice was tight, barely controlled. "What the hell is going on here?" he growled, storming toward Danielle. "Why is she in cuffs? Who did this?" He turned to Sergeant Adams, demanding answers. The sergeant stammered, fumbling through Delaney and Carson's so-called report, but McMillan didn't need to hear the rest. He could already smell the rot in the room. He turned back to Danielle, his voice softening, eyes narrowing with concern. "Tell me everything." Danielle nodded once. Her tone was composed, but every word she spoke landed like thunder in the room. She detailed it all. How she had been calmly grocery shopping, how Delaney and Carson had approached her with mocking tones, their harassment, the humiliation, the public arrest without cause. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't exaggerate, didn't plead. She simply told the truth. And that truth burned. Macmillan's hands curled into fists at his sides. He stared at the two officers as the story sank in. His jaw clenched tighter with every sentence. His fury became volcanic. Voice cracking under pressure. Voice cracking under pressure. Chief, it's not like that. It was a misunderstanding. She got mouthy, started threatening us. Carson chimed in desperately, nodding too fast. Yeah, Chief. She called us out in front of everyone, made a scene. We just tried to de-escalate. Enough? Macmillan didn't shout. He didn't need to. The single word cut the air like a blade. Both officers snapped to attention, their excuses crumbling. Silence fell like a curtain. His voice, when he spoke again, was low, cold, and he spoke again, was low, cold, and final. Officer Delaney, Officer Carson. They flinched at the sound of their names. You are hereby suspended, effective immediately, indefinitely. Department property, you are to leave this building now. You will await formal investigation and internal review. There was no appeal, no argument. Just the weight of judgment crashing down. Macmillan turned to Sergeant Adams, then spotted a figure entering the room. Lieutenant Evelyn Johnson, eyes wide from the commotion she'd overheard down the hall. Lieutenant Johnson, Macmillan said firmly. Process Danielle Blake out immediately. Remove those cuffs, escort her in my office, and make sure she gets medical attention for her wrists. Adams scrambled into motion. Johnson nodded sharply, already moving toward Danielle with a key. Delaney and Carson stood frozen, hands twitching at their belts, their world dissolving around them. They handed over their gear like zombies, the magnitude of what they'd done settling in. It wasn't just about losing their jobs. It was about losing everything. Part 8. No mercy for the uniformed unworthy or in charge, Macmillan said to Lieutenant Johnson, his voice clipped and resolute. Launch a full and immediate internal investigation into the actions of Officer Delaney and Officer Carson. Regarding this incident, I want all security footage from the Golden Harvest supermarket collected. Locate and interview every available witness. He stepped closer to Johnson, eyes burning. I want a full preliminary report on my desk by 8:00 tomorrow. No delays, no red tape. Sheriff's fury radiated through the room like a furnace. The air was suffocating, dense with consequence. Everyone could feel it. Something irreversible had just happened. Delaney and Carson knew it too. In a final act of desperation, the weight and the instinct to survive overcame whatever shreds of pride they had left. Chief, please? Delaney choked, suddenly collapsing to his knees like a man watching his life burn before him. We know we messed up. We were stupid, reckless. It got out of control. Just, please reconsider. Give us a chance to fix this. Carson dropped beside him, tears welling up. Please, Lena, she begged, voice shaking. We have families. Over a mistake. Full, pathetic display would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. But Lena didn't laugh. She didn't flinch. She looked at them, not with vengeance, but with something far worse for them, indifference. Her eyes were cold, distant. Their hands were cold, distant. Begged for mercy from someone they had denied dignity. And as for Macmillan, he didn't speak. His silence was judgment itself. Lieutenant Johnson stepped forward and nodded grimly at two uniformed officers. Take them out, the two who had swaggered into the supermarket that day. Full of power and entitlement, now, shuffled out in handcuffs, their badges gone, their careers over. The shame clung to them heavier than their belts ever had. The door slammed behind them. A deep, aching silence settled. Was gone, replaced by sorrow, concern, and a weight that dug into his very soul. He stepped toward her slowly, then reached for her wrists with a gentleness so different from the brutality of earlier. His voice was raw. You okay? He asked quietly, brushing his thumb over the raw red welts left by the cuffs. So sorry. I should have never. He stopped himself. Words felt small in this moment. He led her into his private office, shut the door, and poured her a glass of water. She sat down, still composed but clearly exhausted. Her strength was evident in the way she didn't collapse into the chair. She held herself there, Macmillan sat next to her and listened again as she recounted everything, this time in everything. More detail. The looks, the words, the cold metal on her skin, the way people stared, the way they didn't help. His jaw clenched. But this time, he didn't interrupt. He didn't talk over her or rush to promises. She finished, he said. Only what mattered. This won't be swept under the rug. Not because you're my fiancé, he said softly, but because this was wrong, and because my badge is supposed to mean something more than protection for men like them. And it was true, because what had just happened wasn't just personal. It was systemic. Part 9. A city stirs. The fallout was immediate. Chief Macmillan didn't wait. The internal investigation was launched with unprecedented urgency. Officers and administrators alike felt the shift in the air. This wasn't just another internal memo to ignore. It was a storm. Macmillan personally oversaw every inch of the review. The city's Civilian Oversight Committee was notified. Oz office received an official briefing. Every relevant agency was looped in. Security footage from Golden Harvest supermarket was secured within hours. Witnesses were interviewed, some shocked, some angry, all willing to talk. And what the investigation uncovered in its early hours was damning. Old video showed Delaney and Carson telling Danielle through the store. Their expressions, their body language, their invasive behavior. It was all on camera. Joel. The audio captured. Mocking, racialized tone. The arrest, completely unprovoked. Danielle's calm resistance contrasted sharply with their escalating aggression. The moment they slammed her into the rack was seared into every frame. There was no gray area. It was abuse. It was misconduct. Was criminal. Part 10. The fall of arrogance. The Golden Harvest supermarket's camera footage revealed everything, every detail. The moment Donovan and Miller approached Lena with that condescending swagger, their casual yet unmistakably predatory movements, the way they invaded her personal space, their mocking tones, the smirk on their faces. The footage captured their words clearly, the snide comments, the demeaning language, and the obvious arrogance that seemed to mark them as untouchable. And then, of course, there was the moment Miller roughly cuffed Lena, his hands tightening the metal bonds to leave marks, to inflict pain. The officer's disregard for Lena's dignity was laid bare for all to see. It was bare for all to see. Irrefutable. Investigators quickly gathered statements from the few shoppers who had been close enough to witness the incident. Their accounts aligned perfectly with Lena's testimony. They confirmed the harassment, the slurs, the insults, and the excessive use of force by the officers. It wasn't just a matter of an isolated outburst. It was a systemic abuse of power that everyone had seen in real time. And it wasn't just the footage or the statements that sealed Donovan and Miller's fate. A thorough review of their records revealed troubling signs. While neither officer had been involved in a major scandal or criminal activity in the past, there were small, consistent issues that had gone unaddressed. Donovan's history of disrespect towards citizens, coupled with Miller's excessive use of force in a previous arrest, painted a clearer picture of the toxic attitudes that had been brewing just under the surface. These incidents, while not grave enough to trigger immediate disciplinary action before, were now part of a growing pattern, with overwhelming evidence at his disposal, and no way to defend the indefensible. Chief Macmillan convened a special disciplinary hearing. The room was heavy with fearing anticipation. Macmillan stood in front of the board, his posture rigid and professional, but his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. Officer Pete Donovan and Officer Kyle Miller have disgraced the badge, Macmillan began, his voice unwavering. The evidence we have gathered is irrefutable. They violate their oaths as officers of the law, but the trust of the very citizens they swore to protect. Their actions were reckless, unprofessional, and damaging to the very core of our department. This is intolerable. He went on to detail the investigation's findings, emphasizing the severity of the charges: harassment, abuse of power, unlawful detention, racial and gender-based slurs, and, most importantly, the tarnishing of the police department's integrity. The decision was swift and decisive. Donovan and Miller were officially terminated from their positions as police officers. Their badges were stripped, their weapons taken, and their names removed from the rolls of the police department. It was the most severe form of discipline the department could impose, and it sent a loud, clear message. No one, no matter their position, would be allowed to abuse their power. The dismissal was not just an internal matter. It was announced publicly, with Chief McMillan's statement broadcasted throughout the city. Today, we make it clear that there is no place in this department for bigotry, discrimination, or abuse of power, McMillan said in his statement. Our responsibility is to protect every citizen, no matter their race, gender, or background. We will hold ourselves to the highest standards, and any officer who falls short will face the consequences. The public reaction was a mix of relief, anger, and cautious optimism. The community was shaken, but they also saw this as a step in the right direction. It wasn't the end, but it was a beginning. Part 11. Strength in Adversity for Lena. The aftermath of the incident was complicated. The pain of what she had endured didn't vanish overnight. The physical marks left by the handcuffs would fade, but the emotional toll lingered. Yet through it all, she found a renewed sense of strength. She had faced full weight of abuse and emerged not only unbroken but more resolute than ever. Her voice, which had once shaken with fear, now rang with conviction. She began speaking out more, not only for herself, but for others who were vulnerable. Were silenced by fear. She became a voice for the oppressed, for those who felt invisible or unheard. David, too, was changed by the events. His anger over what had happened to Lena had burned away the complacency Hyde sometimes felt in his position. He was now fully committed to reform, to cleansing the force of corruption and ensuring that such incidents would never happen again. His focus shifted to enhancing the department's training procedures on professional ethics, communication, anti-discrimination, and internal monitoring. He knew that this was just one battle, but it was the start of a much larger war for justice. Within the force, Lena and David's bond grew even stronger. Forged in the fire of this shared ordeal, they stood together stronger than before, and ready to continue fighting for their love, for their community, and for the promise that things could and would be better. One that continues to explore the themes of justice, courage, and standing up against injustice. These stories might be challenging, but they remind us that change is possible when we speak out and hold those in power accountable. Stay tuned for more, and thank you for your support. Until then, take care and keep pushing for a world where respect and fairness prevail.